Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens is not just the story of an orphan's struggle for survival, but a deep exploration of the societal issues that plagued 19th century England. Through Oliver's journey, Dickens masterfully critiques the cruel systems in place, particularly the poor laws and the workhouse system, while also exposing the deep divide between the wealthy and the impoverished. Oliver's story is a window into the harsh realities faced by the most vulnerable in society, especially children, who were often subjected to inhumane treatment and neglect. The novel reflects Dickens's own experiences and observations of poverty in Victorian London. Dickens had personally witnessed the plight of the poor and the hypocrisy of those in power. His detailed descriptions of the grim conditions in workhouses, the exploitation of orphans, and the corruption rampant among the wealthy offer a scathing indictment of Victorian society. Yet Oliver Twist is not simply a tale of hardship. It is also a story of resilience, hope, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. Oliver's innocence and determination to survive in a world that seems bent on crushing him make him a symbol of purity amidst corruption. His journey from a workhouse orphan to a pawn in London's criminal underworld reveals the stark choices faced by the poor. Through the characters Oliver meets, ranging from the cruel and exploitative to the kind-hearted and generous, Dickens offers a panoramic view of the best and worst of humanity. The novel is also a powerful exploration of how children, especially those without families, are treated by society. In Oliver's case, his journey is not just one of survival, but of finding belonging and identity in a world that constantly threatens to erase both. Chapter 1 treats of the place where Oliver Twist was born and of the circumstances attending his birth. Oliver Twist begins with a stark and heart-wrenching depiction of Oliver's entrance into the world. Born in a workhouse, a grim, state-run institution where the poor were sent to live and work, Oliver's life begins in tragedy. His mother, a young woman of unknown background, dies moments after giving birth to him. The midwife and parish surgeon who attend the birth are indifferent to the mother's death and view the newborn Oliver with equal coldness. His father is never mentioned, and from the outset, Oliver is marked as a child of no status, with no family to care for or protect him. The description of Oliver's birth sets the tone for the novel, highlighting the cruelty and neglect that characterize the world of the poor. The workhouse itself is a symbol of the dehumanizing systems in place, where the poor are treated as a burden and their lives are deemed worthless by the authorities. Oliver's birth into this world of indifference and harsh judgment immediately evokes sympathy, and readers are drawn into his plight. Dickens uses this opening to critique the institutions designed to care for the poor, particularly the workhouses established under the Poor Law Amendment Act of 1834. These workhouses were notoriously inhumane, with conditions so harsh that they were meant to deter people from seeking help. Oliver, born into this bleak environment, is a symbol of the many children who were abandoned by a system that viewed poverty as a moral failing rather than a social problem. Chapter 2 treats of Oliver Twist's growth, education, and board. Oliver spends the first 9 years of his life in an orphanage run by Mrs. Mann, a woman as cold and calculating as the system she works for. Though the orphanage is supposed to provide for the children, Mrs. Mann siphons off the funds meant for their care, leaving the children malnourished and neglected. Oliver, like the other children, suffers greatly under her care, receiving little nourishment and even less affection. At the age of 9, Oliver is sent to the workhouse, marking the beginning of a new chapter of hardship. The workhouse is a place of strict discipline and meager provisions, where the children are subjected to grueling tasks and treated as mere cogs in a machine. It is here that Oliver utters the famous line that has become synonymous with his character, "Please, sir, I want some more." This simple request for more food, a reflection of his desperate hunger, is met with shock and outrage by the workhouse authorities, who view it as an act of rebellion. The workhouse's reaction to Oliver's request demonstrates the cruelty of the institution. Rather than being treated with compassion, Oliver is branded a troublemaker and subjected to further punishment. Dickens uses this episode to highlight the absurdity of a system that punishes the poor for their basic needs and portrays hunger as a moral failing. Chapter 3 relates how Oliver Twist was very near getting a place, which would not have been a sinecure. Following the infamous Moore incident, the workhouse authorities decide to rid themselves of Oliver by offering £5 to anyone willing to take him as an apprentice. This sum, though small, is seen as a solution to their problem. The offer is advertised, and soon Mr. Sowerberry, an undertaker, takes an interest in Oliver. Oliver is apprenticed to Mr. Sowerberry, marking another low point in his life. The job of an undertaker's apprentice is grim, exposing the young boy to death and mourning on a daily basis. His first experiences at the Sowerberry household are far from comforting. He is mistreated by Mr. Sowerberry's wife, who views him as an inferior servant, and he quickly realizes that his new life may be just as harsh as the one he left behind. This chapter introduces another key theme in the novel: the commodification of the poor. Oliver, like many children of his time, is seen as a disposable commodity, valued only for the labor he can provide. His apprenticeship to Mr. Sowerberry is not a step toward independence or self-improvement, but rather a continuation of the cycle of exploitation that began at the workhouse. Chapter 4. Oliver, being offered another place, makes his first entry into public life. As Oliver adjusts to life as an undertaker's apprentice, he's exposed to the darker side of humanity. His duties involve attending funerals and witnessing the grief of the families left behind. However, rather than being moved by the sorrow around him, Oliver becomes increasingly aware of the coldness and indifference with which death is treated by those in his profession. The Sowerberrys, particularly Mrs. Sowerberry, view funerals as mere business transactions, with no regard for the dignity of the deceased or the emotions of the mourners. The stark contrast between the solemnity of death and the callousness of the Sowerberrys leaves a lasting impression on Oliver. His work at the undertaker's shop becomes a source of internal conflict, as he grapples with the emotional toll of witnessing death while being expected to remain detached and unemotional. This chapter further emphasizes the theme of exploitation, as Oliver is used not only for his labor, but also as a pawn in the larger system that profits from the misery of others. Chapter 5. Oliver mingles with new associates. Going to a funeral for the first time, he forms an unfavorable notion of his master's business. Oliver's first experience attending a funeral deepens his discomfort with his role as an undertaker's apprentice. The funeral is for a young child, and Oliver is struck by the profound sadness of the event. Yet, to Mr. Sowerberry and his wife, it is just another job. They show no compassion for the grieving family, focusing instead on the payment they will receive. Oliver's growing distaste for the undertaker's trade reflects his innate sense of morality and empathy. Despite the harshness of his surroundings, Oliver retains a purity of heart that sets him apart from those around him. He begins to realize that he does not belong in the world of death and exploitation, and his feelings of isolation grow as he continues to face cruelty from both his employers and his fellow apprentice, Noah Claypole. Chapter 7. Oliver continues refractory. After the incident with Noah, Oliver resolves to escape the Sowerberry household and the life of misery it represents. His decision to run away is born out of desperation. He has no plan, no money, and no destination in mind, but the thought of remaining in a place where he is constantly mistreated is unbearable. Oliver's flight is an act of defiance, a bold step toward reclaiming his autonomy in a world that has offered him nothing but suffering. The journey ahead is fraught with uncertainty, but for Oliver, the prospect of freedom, however uncertain, is preferable to the certainty of continued abuse. His decision to run away is a testament to his resilience and determination to survive, despite the overwhelming odds stacked against him. Chapter 8. Oliver walks to London. He encounters on the road a strange sort of young gentleman. Oliver's escape leads him on a perilous journey to London, a city he imagines will offer him the freedom and opportunity he longs for. However, the reality of his journey is harsh. He is cold, hungry, and exhausted as he makes his way along the road. His naivety is evident as he has no idea of the dangers that await him in the big city. On the road to London, Oliver meets Jack Dawkins, a boy around his age who introduces himself as the Artful Dodger. The Dodger appears friendly and offers Oliver food and companionship, suggesting that he knows people in London who can help him. Starving and desperate for a friend, Oliver accepts the Dodger's offer, unaware that this seemingly kind boy is actually a skilled pickpocket, leading him into a life of crime. Chapter 9. Containing further particulars concerning the pleasant old gentleman and his hopeful pupils. Once in London, Oliver is introduced to Fagan, an elderly man who runs a gang of young thieves. Fagen is a sinister figure who manipulates and exploits the boys under his care, teaching them how to pickpocket and steal for him. He rewards them for their criminal activities with food and shelter, creating a false sense of security for the boys who have no other means of survival. Oliver, still innocent and unaware of the true nature of Fagan's operation, is initially grateful for the kindness and protection he receives. He feels for the first time a sense of belonging among the Dodger and the other boys. However, it soon becomes clear that Oliver is being groomed for a life of crime as Fagan begins to teach him the tricks of the trade. This chapter marks a pivotal moment in Oliver's journey as he transitions from the innocence of his childhood into the harsh realities of the criminal underworld. Dickens uses Fagan's character to represent the darker side of society, where vulnerable children are exploited and led astray by those who prey on their desperation. Chapter 10. Oliver becomes better acquainted with the characters of his new associates and purchases experience at a high price. As Oliver settles into Fagan's hideout, he gradually begins to understand the true nature of his new companions. At first, the camaraderie between the boys and the jovial atmosphere misleads Oliver, giving him a false sense of belonging. However, the harsh reality soon becomes apparent as he witnesses the other boys, led by the artful Dodger, returning from their daily rounds of pickpocketing and theft. Oliver is shocked and disturbed when he realizes that his newfound friends are criminals, and that Fagan, who had seemed like a kind protector, is actually their ringleader, profiting from their illegal activities. One day, Oliver is unwittingly dragged into one of their schemes. The artful Dodger and another boy, Charlie Bates, take Oliver with them into the streets of London. As they wander, Oliver observes their strange behavior, but it is not until the Dodger and Charlie steal a handkerchief from an unsuspecting gentleman, Mr. Brownlow, that Oliver understands what they are doing. Horrified, Oliver runs away, but the theft is noticed, and Mr. Brownlow wrongly accuses Oliver of being the thief. This marks Oliver's first encounter with the law, and despite his innocence, he is arrested for a crime he did not commit. Chapter 11 treats of Mr. Fang, the police magistrate, and furnishes a slight specimen of his mode of administering justice. Oliver is taken before Mr. Fang, a notorious and harsh magistrate who is quick to assume the worst of the boy. The scene in the courtroom is one of chaos and intimidation as Mr. Fang bullies Oliver, refusing to believe his protests of innocence. Oliver, weak and disoriented from exhaustion and hunger, can hardly defend himself, and it seems that justice will not be on his side. However, Mr. Brownlow, the man whose handkerchief was stolen, begins to have second thoughts. Upon closer inspection, he notices that Oliver is far too innocent and frail to be a hardened thief. Sympathizing with the boy's obvious distress and poor condition, Mr. Brownlow intervenes on Oliver's behalf, urging Mr. Fang to show mercy. After much reluctance, the magistrate dismisses the charges, and Mr. Brownlow, moved by compassion, takes Oliver into his care. For the first time in his life, Oliver is shown kindness and concern, as Mr. Brownlow brings him to his home in the well-to-do district of Bloomsbury to recover from his ordeal. Chapter 12, in which Oliver is taken better care of than he ever was before, and in which the narrative reverts to the merry old gentleman and his youthful friends under the care of Mr. Brownlow. Oliver begins to heal both physically and emotionally. The contrast between the dark, squalid environment of Fagan's lair and the warmth and security of Mr. Brownlow's home is striking. For the first time, Oliver is treated with kindness, given proper food, and allowed to rest in a comfortable bed. Mr. Brownlow and his housekeeper, Mrs. Bedwin, show him affection and concern, something Oliver has rarely experienced in his life. Meanwhile, back at Fagan's den, the old man is growing increasingly anxious about Oliver's absence. Fagan fears that Oliver, now in the care of Mr. Brownlow, may reveal the gang's criminal activities to the authorities. He begins plotting how to get Oliver back and enlists the help of Nancy, one of his youthful accomplices, and Bill Sykes, a brutal and violent thief. Both Nancy and Sykes are determined to retrieve Oliver, as they, too, fear the repercussions if he speaks to the police. Nancy, however, begins to show a conflicted sense of morality, as she feels guilt for the role she plays in Oliver's suffering. Chapter 13. Some new acquaintances are introduced to the intelligent reader, connected with whom various pleasant matters are related, appertaining to this history. In this chapter, the narrative shifts back to Fagan and his growing concerns about Oliver's time away from the gang. Fagan's fear that Oliver will betray them leads him to make a decisive move. He seeks the help of Bill Sykes, a cold-hearted and dangerous criminal with whom Fagan has long worked. Sykes is known for his brutality, and he quickly agrees to help Fagan retrieve Oliver, seeing the boy as a potential risk to their operations. Nancy, however, emerges as a more complex character. While deeply involved in Fagan's criminal enterprise, she begins to reveal a softer, more sympathetic side. She expresses concern for Oliver's well-being and hesitates to take part in the plan to recapture him. Dickens begins to show Nancy's internal struggle as she balances her loyalty to Fagan and her growing moral unease about the harm being done to Oliver. Chapter 14, comprising further particulars of Oliver's stay at Mr. Brownlow's, with the remarkable prediction which one Mr. Grimwig uttered concerning him when he went out on an errand. As Oliver grows stronger under Mr. Brownlow's care, he begins to experience what a normal, happy life could be like. He enjoys the security and comfort of Mr. Brownlow's home and forms a strong attachment to the elderly gentleman. Mr. Brownlow, too, grows increasingly fond of Oliver and starts to entertain thoughts of adopting the boy. However, not everyone in Mr. Brownlow's circle is as trusting of Oliver. Mr. Grimwig, a friend of Mr. Brownlow, expresses suspicion about Oliver's background and suggests that the boy might still be connected to criminals. Grimwig's cynicism creates tension, and when Oliver is sent on an errand to return some books, Grimwig predicts that Oliver will seize the opportunity to run away and never return. Unfortunately, Grimwig's prediction seems to come true, but not for the reasons he suspects. As Oliver sets off on the errand, he is intercepted by Nancy and Bill Sykes, who have been lying in wait to capture him. They forcibly take Oliver back to Fagan's den, leaving Mr. Brownlow and Mrs. Bedwin confused and heartbroken by his sudden disappearance. Chapter 15, showing how very fond of Oliver Twist, the merry old Jew, and Miss Nancy were. Oliver's return to Fagan's hideout is marked by a mixture of relief and anger from the criminals. Fagan is furious that Oliver has been in the hands of a wealthy gentleman, fearing that their criminal operation may have been exposed. However, Oliver's time with Mr. Brownlow has strengthened his sense of right and wrong, and he resists Fagan's attempts to pull him deeper into their world of crime. Nancy, despite her involvement in Oliver's abduction, continues to show signs of compassion. She regrets her role in taking Oliver away from the kindness of Mr. Brownlow and begins to struggle more openly with the life she leads. While her circumstances prevent her from leaving the criminal world, her growing affection for Oliver reveals a deep moral conflict within her. Despite Fagan's influence, Nancy cannot fully embrace the darkness of her surroundings and begins to show signs of wanting to protect Oliver. Sykes, on the other hand, is far less sympathetic. He has no regard for Oliver's innocence and sees the boy only as a tool to further his criminal schemes. Sykes forces Oliver to participate in their next burglary, dragging the boy deeper into the criminal underworld against his will. Chapter 16 relates what became of Oliver Twist. After he had been claimed by Nancy, Oliver's worst fears are realized when he is coerced into aiding Bill Sykes in a burglary attempt. Sykes and his criminal associates plan to break into a large country house, and they need Oliver to climb through a small window to help them gain access. Terrified and desperate, Oliver is left with no choice but to go along with the plan. As the burglary unfolds, Oliver's moral compass shines through. Even as he is forced into this illegal act, he tries to warn the inhabitants of the house, risking his own safety in a desperate attempt to avoid further crime. His bravery, however, does not save him from the violence that follows. Oliver is shot during the robbery, and Sykes, fearing capture, leaves the injured boy behind as he flees the scene. Oliver's fate seems sealed as he lies wounded and alone, abandoned by those who used him for their own gain. The boy's innocence and courage in the face of such cruelty are starkly contrasted with the heartlessness of Sikes and Fagan, emphasizing the depth of Oliver's moral integrity. Chapter 17. Oliver's Destiny. Continuing unpropitious, brings a great man to London to injure his reputation. While Oliver struggles for survival after being shot, the narrative introduces Monks, a shadowy and mysterious figure with a deep interest in Oliver's downfall. Monks is revealed to have a personal vendetta against Oliver, and his malevolent intentions are soon made clear. He conspires with Fagan, determined to ruin the boy's life for reasons that are not yet fully explained. Monks's appearance in the story adds another layer of intrigue, suggesting that Oliver's hardships are not simply the result of bad luck, but are part of a larger, more sinister plot. Monk's obsession with destroying Oliver further complicates the boy's journey, hinting at a hidden past that has yet to be uncovered. Chapter 18. How Oliver passed his time in the improving society of his reputable friends. Despite the grim circumstances of his life, Oliver once again finds himself rescued by kindness. After being shot, he is discovered by Mrs. Maylie and her niece Rose, who take him in and care for him. Their compassion and generosity stand in stark contrast to the cruelty Oliver has endured at the hands of Fagan and Sikes. As Oliver recovers under the care of these kind women, he experiences a sense of safety and belonging that has long eluded him. Mrs. Maylie and Rose refuse to believe that Oliver is a criminal, and their unwavering support allows him to regain his strength and spirit. In their care, Oliver begins to share the story of his life, and the women are moved by the injustices he has faced. For the first time in a long while, Oliver feels hope. Though his past continues to haunt him, the love and care he receives from Mrs. Maylie and Rose offer a glimpse of the better life he longs for. As the story progresses, Oliver's resilience and purity of heart become ever more apparent, proving that even in the darkest of circumstances, goodness can prevail. Chapter 19, in which a notable plan is discussed and determined. At Fagan's den, the atmosphere is tense as the gang, led by Bill Sikes, prepares for a significant heist. Fagan, a manipulative and cunning leader, realizes that Oliver is an essential part of their next plan. The boy's small size makes him the perfect candidate to gain entry into a house for burglary. However, getting Oliver to cooperate is another matter entirely. Fagan and Sikes sit down to discuss their strategy, speaking in low, hushed tones as if aware that Oliver, although naive, is not easily duped. Sikes, the most brutal of Fagan's associates, expresses little concern for Oliver's well-being. To him, the boy is a mere pawn, and Sikes intends to use him without remorse. Fagen, on the other hand, is more manipulative and calculated. He knows Oliver's innocence and reluctance to commit crime, but sees it as a challenge to bend the boy's will. The two criminals agree that force and fear are their best tools for keeping Oliver in line. As they finalize their grim plan, the reader is left with a sense of impending doom, knowing that Oliver is once again being drawn deeper into a web of crime from which there seems to be no escape. Chapter 20, wherein Oliver is delivered over to Mr. Bill Sikes. Despite Oliver's protests, Fagan coldly hands him over to Bill Sikes. The scene is fraught with tension as Oliver, terrified and confused, is forced into the clutches of the ruthless burglar. Oliver's helplessness contrasts sharply with Sikes's hardened criminal demeanor, emphasizing the boy's innocence in the face of such malevolence. Sikes is not one for sympathy. He drags Oliver along without explanation, ignoring the boy's fear and pleas for mercy. As they make their way through the dark streets of London, the city itself seems to mirror Oliver's growing despair, filthy, dangerous, and unyielding. For Oliver, every step feels like a march toward his doom, and yet, despite his dread, a small flicker of hope remains. He wonders if, somehow, he might be able to escape this latest ordeal. However, with Sikes's iron grip and constant threats looming over him, Oliver realizes he has little control over his fate. Chapter 21. The expedition Sikes and Oliver set off on their ominous journey. Their destination, a house in the countryside where the burglary will take place. The long journey, made on foot and by cart, is a slow build-up of dread for Oliver. He feels the weight of what is to come, even though the full extent of the crime has not yet been explained to him. The countryside, usually a symbol of freedom and beauty, feels like a prison to Oliver, as he's led away from the city and deeper into isolation. Throughout the journey, Oliver silently contemplates his options. He considers trying to escape, but Sykes's menacing presence makes it clear that any attempt would likely end in violence. Sykes's terse comments and harsh demeanor serve as constant reminders of the danger Oliver faces. The deeper they travel into the countryside, the more Oliver feels cut off from the world he once knew, though that world was filled with hardship as well. As they near their destination, the tension rises. Sykes gives Oliver a rundown of what will happen. His role in the burglary, though small, is critical. Oliver is to crawl through a window and unlock the door from the inside. The sheer immorality of the plan weighs heavily on Oliver, and he contemplates the innocent people who will be affected by the crime. His fear intensifies, but there's no turning back. Chapter 22. The Burglary. The night of the burglary arrives. Oliver, though sick with fear, is forced to accompany Sykes and his accomplice, Toby Crackett, to the targeted house. The air is thick with tension as they approach the quiet, unsuspecting home. Sykes forces Oliver to climb through a small window, just as they had planned. As Oliver looks inside the house, the sense of dread consumes him. He's about to be part of a crime that goes against everything he believes in. Though trembling, Oliver tries to summon his courage. In a desperate attempt to do the right thing, he hesitates, hoping to find a way to alert the sleeping inhabitants. But before he can act, Sykes loses patience and threatens Oliver, making it clear that any disobedience will be met with violence. Just as Oliver begins to open the door, a figure from within the house stirs. Panic ensues, and in the confusion, a shot is fired. Oliver is hit and collapses, his small body crumpling in the doorway. Instead of helping him, Sykes and Crackett flee, abandoning the boy in his injured state. As Oliver lies bleeding, left to die in a stranger's home, it seems that fate has dealt him its final, cruel blow. Chapter 23. A conversation between Mr. Bumble and a lady. While Oliver's fate hangs in the balance, the narrative shifts to Mr. Bumble, the pompous and self-important beadle of the workhouse. Mr. Bumble is now courting Mrs. Corney, the matron of the poorhouse. Their courtship is marked by Bumble's characteristic arrogance and Mrs. Corney's coy manipulation. They discuss matters of mutual benefit, but there's an undercurrent of selfish ambition driving both characters. Their conversation, laced with thinly veiled opportunism, hints at deeper secrets regarding Oliver's origins. During their discussion, Mrs. Corney reveals that she has access to information that could have significant consequences. Mr. Bumble, ever the opportunist, takes a keen interest, and their conversation begins to lay the groundwork for later revelations about Oliver's true parentage. This chapter, though seemingly a diversion, serves as a crucial turning point in the larger plot, linking Oliver's fate to individuals who hold the key to his past. Chapter 24. A short chapter of importance. Though brief, this chapter contains vital clues that move the plot forward. Mr. Bumble and Mrs. Corney's scheming points toward a larger conspiracy surrounding Oliver's birth and inheritance. There is a hint of darker forces at work, with secrets and hidden agendas that will soon come to light. This chapter serves as a prelude to the unraveling of the mystery surrounding Oliver's identity, leaving the reader with a sense of anticipation. Chapter 25. Mr. Fagan and Company. Back in London, Fagen and his gang are growing increasingly anxious. The burglary has failed, and Fagan is concerned about the repercussions. With Oliver now unaccounted for, Fagan fears that the boy could be in the hands of the authorities, where he might reveal everything he knows about the gang's criminal operations. Fagan's paranoia and desperation mount, and the unity of the gang begins to fracture. The members of the gang are all too aware that if Oliver talks, their entire enterprise could crumble. Fagan, ever the master manipulator, tries to keep control of his associates, but the pressure is taking its toll. Even the artful dodger, usually confident and carefree, begins to show signs of concern. The gang's unease creates a palpable tension, with everyone looking over their shoulder, fearing that their time is running out. Chapter 26. A mysterious character appears. Monks, the dark and secretive figure with an inexplicable grudge against Oliver, reappears in this chapter. His interactions with Fagan reveal that Monks is deeply invested in keeping Oliver's true identity hidden. There is an air of menace about Monks, whose motivations are slowly being uncovered. He has a personal stake in Oliver's downfall, and his conversations with Fagan suggest a long-standing vendetta. Monks's determination to destroy Oliver is fueled by more than just criminal interests. It becomes clear that there's a familial connection between Monks and Oliver. Monks is willing to go to great lengths, even engaging in criminal activity, to ensure that Oliver never discovers the truth about his heritage. His shadowy presence adds a new layer of intrigue and danger to the story, leaving the reader to wonder what dark secrets Monks is hiding. Chapter 27. Apology for Leaving the Lady. The story shifts back to Mrs. Corney, who is now Mrs. Bumble, having married the ambitious Mr. Bumble. Their relationship, however, is far from harmonious. Mrs. Bumble, once a calculating figure in her own right, quickly takes control of the household, leaving Mr. Bumble humiliated and powerless. Their marriage is depicted as a comical power struggle, with Mrs. Bumble clearly dominating her husband. Despite the humor in their bickering, this chapter reveals important developments regarding Oliver's history. Mrs. Bumble possesses key information about Oliver's origins, but her motivations are entirely self-serving. Both she and Mr. Bumble are driven by greed and ambition, and their actions will have significant consequences for Oliver's future. Chapter 28. Oliver's adventures continue. Back in the countryside, Oliver's fortunes take a surprising turn. After being shot and left for dead, he is discovered by Mrs. Maylie and her niece, Rose. These two women, unlike many of the characters Oliver has encountered, are kind-hearted and compassionate. They take Oliver into their home and care for him, nursing him back to health with tenderness and love. As Oliver slowly recovers, he is overwhelmed by the warmth and generosity of the Maylie family. For the first time since Mr. Brownlow's care, Oliver experiences a sense of safety and belonging. Mrs. Maylie and Rose are determined to protect the boy, and they believe wholeheartedly in his innocence. Oliver, still traumatized by his past experiences, begins to open up to them about his life. His recovery marks the beginning of a new chapter in his life, one filled with hope and the possibility of redemption. Chapter 29. The Inmates of the House. As Oliver recuperates, he learns more about his new caretakers. Mrs. Maylie is a dignified, strong-willed woman who exudes wisdom and grace. Her niece, Rose, is the embodiment of kindness and compassion. Both women are drawn to Oliver's innocence and see him not as a criminal, but as a child who has been mistreated by a cruel and unjust world. The bond that develops between Oliver and the two women is profound. Mrs. Maylie and Rose take on a protective role, treating Oliver as part of their family. Their belief in his goodness helps restore Oliver's faith in humanity, and he begins to feel a sense of hope for the future. The contrast between the warmth of the Maylie household and the cold brutality of Fagan's den is stark, highlighting the theme of redemption that runs throughout the novel. Chapter 30. Oliver's New Visitors. As Oliver continues to heal, Mrs. Maylie and Rose start to ask questions about his past. They are determined to get to the bottom of how such a young and innocent boy ended up in the clutches of criminals like Fagan and Sykes. Oliver, still unsure of how much he should reveal, hesitates to tell them everything. His fear of retribution from Fagan's gang lingers, and he doesn't want to put his new friends in danger. Nevertheless, the Maylie women's persistence, combined with their genuine care for Oliver, encourages him to slowly open up. He begins to share pieces of his story, though many mysteries remain unsolved. As the chapter closes, there is a sense that Oliver's journey is far from over, but for the first time in a long while, he has allies who will fight to protect him from the darkness that still threatens his life. Chapter 31. A critical moment. The calm and tranquility that Oliver has come to know under the care of Mrs. Maylie and Rose is soon disrupted by an unforeseen and critical event. Although Oliver is trying to adjust to his new life of safety and affection, there is a growing sense of foreboding that something sinister is about to unfold. Unknown to Oliver and his caretakers, Fagen and his gang are still searching for him, desperate to recapture him before he reveals too much about their criminal activities. Fagan is growing more anxious about the potential threat Oliver poses. He knows that if the boy speaks to the authorities, the entire criminal operation could be exposed. Furthermore, Monks, who harbors a personal vendetta against Oliver, is putting pressure on Fagan to act swiftly. The stakes are higher than ever, as Monks has made it clear that he has his own motives for ensuring that Oliver's identity remains hidden, and Fagan can sense that his criminal empire may crumble if Oliver is not silenced. In this critical moment, the plot against Oliver thickens, and the reader is left with an unsettling feeling that the peace Oliver has found may soon be shattered. Chapter 32. Oliver's Happy Life. Despite the growing threat posed by Fagan and Monks, Oliver's life with Mrs. Maylie and Rose is marked by a rare period of happiness and stability. For the first time in his life, Oliver is surrounded by love and care, which allows him to flourish. The stark contrast between the dark, dangerous world he was once part of and the serene, nurturing environment he now finds himself in is profound. Oliver is treated like a member of the family, and the affection he receives from Mrs. Maylie and Rose helps him heal emotionally and physically from the trauma he has endured. During this period, Oliver's confidence grows, and he begins to imagine a future that is free from fear and filled with hope. His days are spent reading, learning, and enjoying the simple pleasures of life, things that were once unimaginable during his time in the workhouse or under Fagan's control. The kindness of Mrs. Maylie and Rose provides Oliver with a new sense of belonging, and he starts to believe that perhaps he has finally escaped the dark shadows of his past. His bond with Rose deepens, and he sees her as a sister figure, someone who represents all that is good in the world. However, despite the joy he experiences, there remains an undercurrent of unease. Oliver is acutely aware that his happiness is fragile, and that the criminals from his past have not forgotten him. Although Oliver tries to push these fears aside, the reader is left with the sense that this period of happiness may not last. Chapter 33. Oliver's Happiness Interrupted. As expected, Oliver's peaceful life is disrupted. Just as he begins to feel secure and settled, new troubles arise, threatening to pull him back into the criminal world he thought he had escaped. Monks and Fagan are more determined than ever to find him, and they are relentless in their efforts. Monks, in particular, is hell-bent on ensuring that Oliver never discovers his true identity, or the fortune that awaits him if the truth comes to light. The return of Monks and Fagan's plotting casts a dark cloud over Oliver's newfound happiness. Although Mrs. Maylie and Rose do everything they can to shield him from danger, it becomes clear that the past is not so easily left behind. As Monks and Fagan's plans gain momentum, Oliver begins to sense that his life is once again at risk. The tension builds as Oliver realizes that the peaceful life he has come to cherish may be fleeting, and that forces beyond his control are conspiring to drag him back into the treacherous underworld. Chapter 34. The Aftermath of Oliver's Adventure. Oliver's attempts to live a normal, happy life are further complicated when Harry Maylie, Mrs. Maylie's son and Rose's admirer, returns to the family estate. Harry, a passionate and ambitious young man, has been courting Rose for some time, and his feelings for her have only grown stronger. However, Rose is hesitant to fully reciprocate Harry's feelings due to her uncertain past and her fears of dragging him into her family's complicated situation. In this chapter, important conversations take place between Harry and Rose, shedding light on the challenges they face as a couple. Rose, ever the selfless and considerate young woman, fears that her mysterious origins and connection to Oliver's troubles could tarnish Harry's social standing. Harry, on the other hand, is determined to prove that his love for Rose transcends any societal expectations or complications. He wants to be part of her life, regardless of the obstacles they may face. Meanwhile, Oliver watches this romantic struggle unfold, and it serves as a reminder that even in a world filled with love and care, personal challenges can still loom large. Harry's return introduces a new layer of complexity to Oliver's life, as the uncertainty surrounding Rose's background and by extension Oliver's raises questions about how deeply entwined their fates truly are. Chapter 35. The Importance of Small Details. Though this chapter may seem brief and unassuming, It lays the groundwork for crucial plot developments that will later play a significant role in unraveling the mysteries surrounding Oliver's parentage. In this chapter, small but important details are revealed, such as seemingly inconsequential conversations or the mention of documents that hold the key to Oliver's identity. Mrs. Bumble, now married to Mr. Bumble, the former beadle of the workhouse, finds herself in possession of an important object, an old locket belonging to Oliver's mother. This locket, though overlooked at the time, will later become a pivotal piece of evidence in uncovering the truth about Oliver's birthright. As the reader takes in these seemingly minor details, there's a growing sense that the puzzle pieces of Oliver's past are slowly falling into place. Chapter 36. More mysteries unfold. The mysteries surrounding Oliver's true identity begin to surface more prominently in this chapter. As Mrs. Maylie and Rose continue to care for Oliver, they cannot help but be curious about the boy's origins. Oliver, too, starts to wonder about his own past. Although he has never known his parents, recent events have made him realize that there may be more to his story than he initially thought. Meanwhile, Monk's and Fagan's schemes continue to unfold in the background. The reader is given more clues about Monk's connection to Oliver, though the full extent of Monk's vendetta remains unclear. It becomes apparent that Monks is not simply interested in silencing Oliver. He has a deeply personal reason for wanting to ruin the boy's life. The stakes are raised as the reader senses that a major revelation is on the horizon, one that will change the course of Oliver's life forever. Chapter 37. A Contrast in Matrimonial Life. The novel takes a brief yet significant detour to explore the marriage of Mr. and Mrs. Bumble, offering a stark contrast to the kindness and care shown by characters like Mrs. Maylie and Rose. Mr. Bumble, once a figure of self-importance and authority in the workhouse, has now been reduced to a mere shadow of his former self under the domineering control of his wife. Their marriage is depicted as a farcical power struggle, with Mrs. Bumble asserting her dominance at every opportunity. Mr. Bumble, who once relished his position of authority, now finds himself belittled and humiliated by his wife. The tension in their relationship serves as a humorous commentary on the institution of marriage, but it also underscores the theme of power and control that runs throughout the novel. Despite the comedic elements, this chapter also sets the stage for the Bumble's eventual downfall. Their greed and ambition have led them down a path of corruption, and their involvement in the conspiracy surrounding Oliver's parentage will soon come to light. As the Bumbles bicker and plot, the reader is reminded that their actions will have far-reaching consequences for Oliver's future. Chapter 38. A Meeting Between Monks and the Bumbles. Monks, driven by his desire to ruin Oliver's life, seeks out Mr. and Mrs. Bumble in this chapter. Their meeting takes place in a dimly lit, secretive setting, underscoring the sinister nature of their dealings. Monks reveals that he knows about the locket Mrs. Bumble has in her possession, and he pressures the Bumbles to give it to him in exchange for money. During this meeting, Monks's true motives become clearer. He has a personal stake in ensuring that Oliver never learns the truth about his parentage, and he is willing to go to great lengths to keep the boy in the dark. The locket, which contains important clues about Oliver's mother, is a key piece of evidence that could unravel the mystery of Oliver's identity. The Bumbles, driven by greed and self-interest, readily agree to Monks's demands. Their willingness to betray Oliver for financial gain highlights their moral corruption and sets the stage for the final confrontation between Monks and those who seek to protect Oliver. Chapter 39. Monks and Fagen. Plot together. Monks and Fagen's partnership deepens as they continue to plot against Oliver. In this chapter, the reader is given further insight into the depths of Monk's hatred for the boy. It becomes clear that Monks is not simply a criminal looking to protect his interests. He has a deeply personal reason for wanting to destroy Oliver's chances of happiness. Monks reveals more about his past, though the full story remains shrouded in mystery. What is clear, however, is that Monks has a familial connection to Oliver and is determined to prevent the boy from claiming his rightful inheritance. Fagan, ever the opportunist, sees Monks's vendetta as a way to further his own criminal enterprise. Together, they hatch a plan to ensure that Oliver is either captured or silenced before he can learn the truth. Chapter 40. A strange interview. In this pivotal chapter, Monks has a strange and tense meeting with another character who holds the key to Oliver's past. The details of the meeting are deliberately vague, heightening the sense of mystery and anticipation. Monks's desperation becomes more apparent as he tries to manipulate the situation to his advantage. The chapter leaves the reader with more questions than answers, but it is clear that the truth about Oliver's identity is on the verge of being revealed. Monks's motives, which have been slowly unraveling throughout the novel, are about to come to the forefront, setting the stage for a dramatic conclusion to Oliver's journey. As the chapter ends, the reader is left wondering how Oliver will fare in the face of these mounting dangers. Will he finally learn the truth about his parentage, or will Monks succeed in his plan to keep Oliver in the dark? The tension is palpable, and the stage is set for the final, climactic moments of the story. Chapter 41. Fresh Discoveries. The intricate puzzle of Oliver's background begins to take shape in this pivotal chapter. After weeks of uncertainty and hidden agendas, new discoveries begin to surface, shedding light on the true nature of Oliver's birth and the shadowy past that has haunted him throughout his young life. These revelations are crucial, as they not only explain why Oliver has been pursued by dangerous individuals, but also why he has been at the center of so many conflicting interests. Mr. Brownlow, determined to uncover the full truth about Oliver, makes several inquiries that lead him to surprising information about the boy's parentage. A visit to a trusted source reveals key documents that suggest Oliver was born into a family of some means. The pieces start falling into place, and Mr. Brownlow learns that Oliver is not just a poor orphan with no prospects, but someone with a rightful claim to an inheritance, a fact that has been deliberately hidden by those who wish to exploit or harm him. The reader begins to understand that Monks, who has been pulling the strings from the shadows, has a personal interest in keeping Oliver from learning about his true heritage. The fresh discoveries point to a larger conspiracy designed to strip Oliver of his rights and push him into a life of crime and misery. The mounting evidence, however, gives Mr. Brownlow the determination to confront Monks and ensure that justice is served, both for Oliver and for those who have suffered because of Monks' schemes. Chapter 42. The Artful Dodger's Fate. As the narrative unfolds, the consequences of a life of crime become starkly clear in this chapter. The Artful Dodger, once the most cunning and streetwise of Fagan's young thieves, meets his fate. His capture and trial serve as a sobering reminder of the dangerous world in which these children have been forced to operate. The Dodger's downfall is not just the result of bad luck, but the inevitable outcome of a life shaped by theft, manipulation, and survival in the criminal underworld. The Dodger's trial is a public spectacle, and despite his bravado, it is clear that he faces a grim future. The courtroom is filled with people eager to see the young thief punished for his crimes. The Dodger, once so confident and cocky, tries to maintain his swagger, but it is obvious that he knows his fate is sealed. His sentencing is swift and harsh, a reflection of the unforgiving nature of the justice system toward the poor and dispossessed. The fall of the Artful Dodger marks a turning point in the novel. It signals the beginning of the end for Fagan's gang, as the law begins to close in on the criminal empire that has thrived in the shadows for so long. The Dodger's fate also serves as a cautionary tale for Oliver, who, despite being caught up in Fagan's world, has managed to maintain his innocence and goodness. Chapter 43. Nancy's Struggle. Nancy's internal struggle reaches its peak in this chapter, as she finds herself torn between her loyalty to Bill Sikes and her growing desire to protect Oliver from the dangers of the criminal world. Nancy is a complex character. Though deeply entrenched in the world of crime, she retains a sense of morality and compassion that sets her apart from the likes of Fagen and Sikes. Her relationship with Oliver, whom she sees as an innocent victim of circumstance, brings out her protective instincts, and she becomes determined to do whatever she can to save him. In a secret meeting with Rose Maley and Mr. Brownlow, Nancy reveals crucial information about Monks and his plot to ruin Oliver's life. She describes the conversations she has overheard between Monks and Fagan, detailing their plans to destroy any chance Oliver has of claiming his inheritance. Nancy's decision to betray the criminals she has long worked with is fraught with danger. She knows that if Sykes or Fagan find out about her actions, the consequences will be dire. Despite her fear, Nancy's bravery shines through in this chapter. Her love for Sykes, though destructive and complicated, does not blind her to the fact that Oliver is in grave danger, and she feels a moral obligation to act. Nancy's struggle is heartbreaking, as she is caught between two worlds, one of crime and loyalty to Sykes, and one of conscience and her need to do what is right. The reader is left in suspense, wondering whether Nancy will be able to follow through with her plan to help Oliver, or if the dark forces around her will ultimately prevent her from doing so. Chapter 44. The time arrives for Nancy to redeem her pledge to Rose Maylie. She fails. Nancy's promise to Rose Maylie to deliver more information about Monks is abruptly interrupted in this chapter, as the oppressive weight of her circumstances prevents her from fulfilling her pledge. Bill Sykes, increasingly suspicious of Nancy's behavior, begins to watch her more closely. His violent and controlling nature looms large over Nancy, and she becomes paralyzed by fear of what he might do if he discovers her betrayal. Though Nancy had every intention of meeting with Rose and Mr. Brownlow again, Sykes's growing distrust and her own internal conflict make it impossible for her to carry out her plan. This chapter is marked by a tense, claustrophobic atmosphere, as Nancy realizes just how deeply trapped she is in her life with Sykes. Despite her best intentions, the toxic relationship she shares with him prevents her from finding a way out. The reader feels Nancy's desperation as she grapples with the impossible choice before her. Stay loyal to Sykes, the man she loves but who will undoubtedly hurt her if he learns the truth, or keep her promise to protect Oliver, the innocent boy whose fate hangs in the balance. Nancy's failure to meet with Rose and Mr. Brownlow signals the tragic trajectory her story is about to take. And the tension continues to build as Sykes' suspicions grow. Chapter 45. Fatal Consequences. In one of the most dramatic and gut-wrenching chapters of the novel, Nancy's fate is sealed. Her decision to protect Oliver and provide information to his benefactors does not go unnoticed by Bill Sykes, whose violent tendencies finally in a terrifying act of brutality. After learning of Nancy's betrayal, Sykes flies into a murderous rage, and in one of the most shocking and horrifying scenes in the book, he kills her in cold blood. Nancy's murder is depicted in graphic detail, with Dickens leaving no doubt about the horror of the act. Sykes, consumed by uncontrollable fury, beats Nancy to death, and in the aftermath of the crime, he is left with the blood on his hands, both literally and figuratively. The murder marks the beginning of Sykes' descent into madness, as the guilt of his actions begins to consume him. Nancy's death is a tragic end for a character who, despite her flaws, was one of the few people in Oliver's life who tried to help him. Her death serves as a stark reminder of the brutal realities of life in the criminal underworld and the terrible cost of loyalty in a world ruled by fear and violence. The reader is left grieving for Nancy, whose courage and compassion ultimately led to her downfall. Chapter 46. The Appointment. Kept following Nancy's brutal murder, the law begins to close in on Bill Sykes. Mr. Brownlow, now fully aware of the danger Oliver is in, teams up with the police to ensure that justice is served. Meanwhile, Sykes, reeling from the guilt and paranoia that has consumed him since killing Nancy, becomes increasingly desperate. His violent nature, once a source of power and control, now turns inward and he begins to unravel. The pursuit of Sykes is tense and filled with suspense as the reader follows his frantic attempts to evade capture. However, the net is closing in, and it becomes clear that Sykes will not be able to escape the consequences of his actions. The appointment with justice that was delayed by Nancy's death is now inevitable, and the chapter builds toward the final confrontation between Sykes and the forces of law and order. Chapter 47. The Last Parting. As Sykes continues his desperate flight from justice, the psychological weight of his crime bears down on him with increasing intensity. He is haunted by visions of Nancy, her face appearing before him wherever he goes. Her death, once a cold, calculated act of violence, now becomes a source of unbearable guilt and torment. Sykes' mental state deteriorates rapidly as he is driven to the edge of madness. In a final act of desperation, Sykes attempts to flee the city, but he is pursued by an angry mob intent on bringing him to justice. Cornered and with no way out, Sykes climbs onto a rooftop in a last-ditch effort to escape. However, in his panic, he loses his footing and falls to his death, the ultimate consequence of his violent and destructive life. Sykes' death brings a sense of closure to one of the novel's most villainous characters. The brutality of his life, which culminated in the murder of Nancy, is finally brought to an end, and justice is served. His death, though tragic in its own way, is a fitting conclusion to the story of a man who lived by violence and ultimately died by it. Chapter 48. The Flight of Sykes. This chapter further explores the final moments of Bill Sykes' life as he flees from the law and the consequences of his actions. Sykes' flight is chaotic and frenzied as he desperately tries to escape the city and avoid capture. However, his guilt over Nancy's murder begins to take a psychological toll, and he becomes increasingly paranoid and unhinged. As Sykes attempts to flee, he is pursued not only by the authorities but by his own conscience. The weight of his crime becomes too much to bear, and Sykes is haunted by visions of Nancy, her face appearing before him at every turn. His descent into madness is swift and brutal, and the chapter ends with his tragic fall from the rooftop. A fitting end for a man who lived by violence and ultimately died by it. Chapter 49. Monks and Mr. Brownlow at length meet. Their conversation, and the intelligence that interrupts it. The long-awaited confrontation between Mr. Brownlow and Monks finally takes place in this chapter. Mr. Brownlow, having uncovered the truth about Oliver's parentage, confronts Monks with the evidence of his guilt. Monks, who has spent the entire novel plotting to ruin Oliver's life, is forced to face the consequences of his actions. During their conversation, Monks reveals the full extent of his involvement in the conspiracy against Oliver. It is disclosed that Monks is, in fact, Oliver's half-brother, and he has been scheming to ensure that Oliver never receives his rightful inheritance. Monk's motivations are rooted in jealousy and greed, as he has always resented Oliver's claim to the family fortune. Mr. Brownlow, ever the voice of reason and justice, forces Monks to confess to his crimes and explain the full story of Oliver's birth and heritage. The truth about Oliver's parentage is finally revealed, and the mysteries surrounding his past are unraveled. This chapter serves as the climax of the novel, where all the loose ends are tied up, and the reader is given a clear understanding of Oliver's true identity. Chapter 50. The Pursuit and Escape. As the truth about Oliver's parentage comes to light, Monks attempts to flee in order to avoid facing the full consequences of his actions. However, his efforts to escape are futile, as justice catches up with him. Monk's downfall is swift, and the reader is given a sense of satisfaction as the villain is finally brought to justice. The pursuit of Monks is filled with tension and suspense as the authorities close in on him. However, unlike Sykes, Monks does not meet a violent end. Instead, he is captured and forced to face the legal consequences of his actions. His escape is cut short, and the novel's primary antagonist is finally held accountable for the pain and suffering he has caused. Chapter 51. Affording an explanation of more mysteries than one, and comprehending a proposal of marriage with no word of settlement or pin money. In this chapter, the remaining mysteries of the novel are explained, and the reader is given a deeper understanding of the events that led up to the present. Mr. Brownlow takes steps to ensure that Oliver receives his rightful inheritance, securing the boy's future and protecting him from further harm. Additionally, the relationship between Harry Maylie and Rose Maylie comes to the forefront, as Harry proposes marriage to Rose. Rose, who has been a source of light and kindness throughout the novel, is revealed to be Oliver's aunt, adding another layer of complexity to the story. Her own family history is tied to the mysteries of Oliver's past, and the proposal serves as a heartwarming conclusion to their love story. The proposal is a moment of joy and hope, offering a sense of closure to the characters who have fought so hard to protect Oliver. Harry's love for Rose is genuine, and despite the challenges they have faced, their union represents the triumph of love and goodness over the darkness that has plagued their lives. Chapter 52. The Conclusion. The final chapter of Oliver Twist brings the story to a satisfying and heartwarming conclusion. Oliver, having endured unimaginable hardship and suffering, is finally safe and secure under the protection of Mr. Brownlow. He inherits his rightful fortune and is surrounded by people who love and care for him, marking the end of his long and arduous journey. The remaining criminals, including Fagan and monks, are brought to justice, and those who sought to harm Oliver are either punished or meet unfortunate ends. Fagen, the manipulative mastermind behind so much of Oliver's suffering, faces his own reckoning, and his criminal empire is dismantled. The novel closes on a hopeful note, reminding readers that despite the many obstacles Oliver faced, his goodness and innocence ultimately prevailed. Oliver's story is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, and Dickens uses the conclusion to underscore the importance of kindness, compassion, and justice in a world often filled with cruelty and hardship. Conclusion. Call to action. Oliver Twist is more than just a tale of a young boy's survival in the face of overwhelming adversity. It is a powerful social commentary on the injustices of the time, shedding light on the plight of the poor and the vulnerable in a society that often turned a blind eye to their suffering. Through Oliver's story, Charles Dickens highlights the importance of love, kindness, and the pursuit of justice. As readers, we are reminded that, like Oliver, we too can overcome the challenges we face by holding on to hope and surrounding ourselves with those who care for us. Oliver Twist is a timeless story of resilience, and its themes of compassion and humanity continue to resonate with readers today. If you enjoyed this detailed summary, consider reading the full novel to experience Dickens' masterful storytelling in its entirety. The story of Oliver Twist is not just about survival. It's about the triumph of the human spirit and the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds.